basically, I have most taken information in through the social media, where individuals are posting some sort of videos, not from big corporations, but just individuals on the ground.
Yeah.
And there are several things that I've noticed. There are multiple videos where Black people are trying to make sure that white people don't destroy things. Mostly white, young, all in Black clothing, and everybody looks the same, unrecognizable, but they are white-skinned. And they are destroying these Black neighborhoods. And there was this video with mysterious man with a black umbrella, gauze, everything black, but he is white-skinned fellow. He just suddenly appears in the auto zone there in Minneapolis.
Yes.
Breaks the first windows. That's pretty much where it started, with the first broken windows. He just comes all prepared, and then he just runs away, and some of the local guys from Black community try to stop him. So what I'm seeing here, there are some clearly white-skinned guys, all dressed in black, coming in these communities and doing this to the communities, you know. So there are these strange things, happening there.
Yes. There's the verse in Jeremiah that says that the heart is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. Who then can know it?
Amen.
It might be Ecclesiastes. I can't remember specifically right now. But yes, you are exactly right that there are people who have a depraved heart. That's the legal term that was used in the first charges against the officer. Third-degree murder, depraved heart killing.
Wow. I didn't know this this type of formulation.
Yeah. And that's what's going on. People with depraved hearts, with dulled consciences, with no empathy, going into these areas, and they don't care about George Floyd. Not a bit. If they did, they would listen to the family who has begged people not to burn, not to loot, not to destroy things, not to attack others, because that would not honor their brother. They've said he would be horrified if he saw what was being done in his name. There is a movement, it's called Antifa. There are other anarchists that are part of or associated with it. And basically they believe that if they destroy everything, somehow something better will appear that's not centralized or organized. And it's a completely depraved mindset that says if I destroy, then I can rebuild.
But not only those who are directly in the action, one of the things when we look at Jesus, he called out hypocrisy. People, they show one face in the public, but then in reality there's something else. And there have been moments of deep hypocrisy from those who kind of cheer it on. Like there was this sports broadcaster who on Twitter, that building you spoke about, this apartment building that it was burning down, he tweeted, "Let it burn down." And then a few days later, there were some protesters coming to the gated community where he lives, behind gates, behind guards. And then he's tweeting, "Go away, animals." This is so strange. Why you are encouraging fires when it's in a minority neighborhood, in the poor people's neighborhood? But then when it comes closer to your rich neighborhood, you suddenly say, "Go away, animals." There is lack of consistency. And so at least I've seen, I can't tell about every person. That would be not genuine, but there are some who are with high social status. They are recognized by all the platforms, blue check Twitter and everything. They're supposed to be authorities, and then turns out they have such a differing opinions, depending, does it affect them or not?
Yes. Well, it's much easier to, as Jesus said, to point out the log in your neighbor's eye, or the splinter in your neighbor's eye, than to pull out the log in your own.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'll say is interesting is this whole thing has revealed a lot of hearts. That had already begun with the COVID-19 on both sides. Whether you look at, conservatives without Christ or liberals without Christ, there's no bottom to the depths that a person can fall.
Yeah.
Jesus clearly is the only solution that can regulate and check the heart that is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. And I think that's the greatest takeaway that I've seen from this whole thing, that we cannot control others. The only thing we can control is our own reactions, our own life, our own reaction, and that must be repentance. It has to be humility of heart, and it has to be willing to speak up for those who cannot speak up. It is horrible what happened to this city. Some neighborhoods have been set back 50, 60 years. There's a gentleman that had been involved in the redevelopment of Snelling Avenue here in the Twin Cities, where light rail was put in the last 20 years. And he'd worked very hard to get businesses to buy into it and to upgrade themselves and to work at making that avenue a prime place.
Yeah.
University Avenue. And he was just heartbroken and furious at what had happened, because none of these places that were destroyed and burned, very few of them will ever rebuild again.
Wow.
The Apple store that was in the area in Minneapolis, they've already said they're not going to rebuild there. It's not worth the risk.
Yeah.
There goes that. The Cub Foods, out of business. Target, where people would shop and get their things, out of business.
Yeah.
Some of these places will not be reopened for months. People who don't have cars, some of them so poor that they can't afford bus fare or the light rail. Where will they get food?
Yeah.
If you love your neighbor as you love yourself, you won't destroy your neighbor's access to what he needs for life, which is job and employment and access to food and medical care.
Steve, I want to ask you, what do you think about Christian response in this situation? What should we do? How do we keep our focus on the main things? Because I see that there's tendency, that we can be distracted from those that are main things, and even now some of the processes, it's no longer about George Floyd, and things like that. It appears it's something else.
The verse that comes to mind immediately is Micah 6:8. He's showing you what is good and what the Lord requires of you. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. And here in the cities, some of the examples that I've seen of that are that churches have responded rapidly and quickly to the sudden lack of the social infrastructure that has been disrupted by the devastation of the riots in the areas that have been primarily affected. Churches have organized, grocery drives. I've heard that people are taking prescription orders, driving to pharmacies where they can get that and driving them back so that people have the access to the medications that they need for those in that place where they need that. Many are, the place where this actually happened, the Cup Foods on 27th and Franklin Avenue. It's become sort of like a memorial. We drove down there, and counselors from Billy Graham International were on site and walking through the crowds, listening, praying, offering bottled water, things like that. It was a very hot morning, even Friday morning. Things like that are happening. The school that I got my undergraduate degree from, North Central University, they are in the neighborhood, and they had the largest sanctuary that you could have. A certain number of people with social distancing. Watching the video feed, that did not happen. People were right there next to each other in the pews. But that they hosted the funeral. They've begun a scholarship in George Floyd's name, reaching out to those in that's the Elliott Park neighborhood of Minneapolis. Bethel University has started a George Floyd Memorial Scholarship. I'm pretty sure Northwestern probably has the same thing beginning. Yeah. So churches are reaching out on a practical level. The groceries, the medications, walking in the crowds, reaching out to the police officers and telling them, we understand you didn't ask for this.
Yeah.
The vast majority of police are not who the four were that George Floyd met that evening, Memorial Day evening. The vast majority are not like that, but now they're forced to deal with it. Yeah. And so that whole spirit of Micah 6:8, act justly. Christians are calling out for justice because it's so clearly an issue of justice. It's not a tragedy. A tragedy means what happened to George Floyd is not a tragedy. A tragedy is something that you have no control over. COVID-19 comes to visit. Yeah. That's a tragedy. Yeah. A hurricane comes up the Mississippi Valley. That's a tragedy. Yeah. No one can do anything about that. But the looting that's been happening, that's injustice. Mm-hmm. The burning of buildings, that's injustice. Mm-hmm. The choking of George Floyd on the ground, that's injustice. And God calls us to act justly. And that means to speak up for those who can't speak up. Mm-hmm. The church, the evangelical church, has been very good at doing that in terms of abortion for 30, 40, 50 years now. In the white side of the evangelical church, it's just beginning with things like the reaction to George Floyd's unjust death, to act justly, to love mercy, to show grace and understanding to those who don't deserve it. One of the things that I saw spray painted on many of the buildings in the areas affected was, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Can you hear us? Mm-hmm. How much louder do we have to be? Things of that sentiment, saying that you've been ignoring us, you've been turning away, can you hear us? For those who are using this as a means of destruction of a social order, primarily coming from a socialist viewpoint, and not even a socialist viewpoint, an anarchist viewpoint. That needs justice. For those who have grown up without a core in circumstances where the family is broken down, there's no father figure present, or the father figure is in prison or jail, whose lives have been destroyed by drug abuse, by physical abuse. Can we show mercy? Can we try to lead them to a place where they can recognize this isn't working, I need an answer, and then Jesus as the answer? Can we love mercy? And then the third part, can we walk humbly with God? That's something else that the church needs to address. Many times we're not heard because we have a superiority complex. We're in the lifeboat. You're not in the lifeboat. Well, it's your fault you're not in the lifeboat. If you really wanted to be in the lifeboat, you could be in the lifeboat. Forgetting that God had to reach down, grab us by the scruff of the back of our neck when we were fighting with him and pull us out of the water and into the lifeboat. We didn't choose to be in here. He chose us. And to remember that, and to walk humbly. And these are things that I'm struggling with. What does it mean for me? I think probably what I hope will come out of this in the long run, for me personally, for us as a family, for our mission with the school, that I don't know how this is going to affect us, in the long term, and for us as a nation. My prayer and my hope would be that we'll find out that at the end of the day, God is using this for his reasons and his purposes, as he did with Joseph. I've always been struck by the grace and the mercy and the justice that Joseph showed his brothers at the end when he says, you meant this for evil, God meant it for good.
Yeah.
In all things, God works together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purposes. And I hope my purposes are lining up with his in this whole.
And that's where the humility comes in, that we realize that we are not all omniscient, knowing it all and understanding it all and able to do it all. But we need to have the humility before God. And also humility helps to build community, because you are not superior toward others. And in a time like this, I think it's important that people can talk. Like what it was spray painted on that wall, can you hear us?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's such a sign of the time when people live so much in the bubbles that social media just even helps kind of to make it more fixed. You live in your bubble so that you don't hear anybody. And then when you hear somebody with a different viewpoint, you feel as if violence has happened to you. Those words are violence toward you. So I think it is so important that we can be humble and hear the other people in their life story. But we as Christians, we certainly want to be influenced by God's perspective. And certainly God stands in the side of justice.
Yes.
His justice sometimes is slow, but it's deeply powerful.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, Steve, but it was very good to hear your voice and hear your perspective right from there, from Minneapolis. And thank you very much for it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share.